Yahoo's Fire Eagle was your location in the cloud. Picture this. It's 2008, the iPhone is barely a year old, and most people are still figuring out what it means to have a computer in their pocket. GPS is something you associate with expensive car navigation systems, not social media. But at Yahoo's headquarters in Sunnyvale, a small team of engineers is about to launch something that would make location sharing as common as posting photos. Fire Eagle was supposed to be the central nervous system for location-based services on the web, a brilliant piece of infrastructure that would let any app know where you were without you having to tell each one individually. The concept was so forward-thinking that it took the rest of the tech industry nearly a decade to fully embrace what Fire Eagle was trying to do in 2008. Unfortunately for Yahoo, being ahead of your time in technology often means being dead on arrival in the marketplace. Fire Eagle launched in July 2008 as Yahoo's answer to a problem that most people didn't even know they had yet. The service positioned itself as a location broker, a middleman between you and the dozens of apps and services that might want to know where you were. Instead of manually checking into Foursquare, updating your Twitter location, telling Flickr where you took that photo, and informing your weather app what city you were in, Fire Eagle would handle all of that automatically. You would update your location once, either manually or through a GPS-enabled device, and Fire Eagle would distribute that information to any authorized application. The technical architecture was actually quite sophisticated for its time. Fire Eagle used a RESTful API that supported multiple location formats including latitude and longitude coordinates, street addresses, neighborhoods, cities, and even vague descriptors like somewhere in California. The service supported 8 different levels of location granularity, from your exact GPS coordinates down to just your country, giving users unprecedented control over how precise they wanted to be with different applications. The timing seemed perfect. The App Store had just launched alongside the iPhone 3G, which was Apple's first phone with built-in GPS. Location-based services were starting to emerge, with companies like Foursquare and Gowalla beginning to experiment with check-in culture. Google had recently launched Latitude, their own location sharing service, proving that the tech giants were taking this space seriously. Fire Eagle's parent company Yahoo was still a major player in the web services game, with popular properties like Flickr and DellECO.us under their umbrella. The service even had some impressive early partnerships, including integration with Doppler for travel planning, Brightkite for social check-ins, and Outside.in for local news. Major mapping services like MapQuest and local search engines like Yelp began experimenting with Fire Eagle integration. The development team, led by Yahoo's Brickhouse incubator, had created what was essentially the OAuth of location services, a standardized way for applications to access and share location data with user permission. But Fire Eagle faced the classic chicken and egg problem that kills many platform plays. Applications wouldn't integrate with Fire Eagle unless there were lots of users, but users wouldn't sign up unless there were lots of useful applications. Unlike successful platforms that solved this by building compelling first-party applications, Fire Eagle relied entirely on third-party developers to create the user experience. Yahoo's own properties were slow to integrate meaningfully with the service. Flickr added basic Fire Eagle support for photo geotagging, but it felt like an afterthought rather than a killer feature. Yahoo Mail never integrated location features. Yahoo Messenger, which could have been perfect for sharing your location with friends, remained completely separate from Fire Eagle. Even Yahoo's local search and mapping services didn't make Fire Eagle a central part of the experience. This lack of internal adoption sent a clear signal to outside developers that even Yahoo didn't think Fire Eagle was essential. The user interface and onboarding process revealed another fundamental problem with Fire Eagle's approach. Setting up the service required understanding OAuth permissions, API keys, and application authorization flows that were far too complex for mainstream users. The Fire Eagle website looked and felt like a developer tool rather than a consumer service. Users had to manually authorize each application that wanted to access their location, creating friction at every step. The mobile experience was particularly clunky, requiring users to visit a web interface to update their location, since dedicated mobile apps were still rare in 2008. Most frustratingly, Fire Eagle offered no compelling standalone functionality. You couldn't just use Fire Eagle to see where your friends were or to track your own location history. It was purely infrastructure, and infrastructure is notoriously difficult to market to consumers. The service felt like plumbing, useful in theory, but invisible and unexciting in practice. Privacy concerns also plagued Fire Eagle from the beginning, even though the service actually had more sophisticated privacy controls than most location services today. The 8-tier granularity system was designed to address privacy concerns, but it ended up confusing users who couldn't understand why they needed so many different levels of location sharing. The fact that Fire Eagle was designed to share your location with multiple services simultaneously made many users uncomfortable, even though each service required explicit authorization. This was years before the Cambridge Analytica scandal would make data sharing a mainstream concern, but early adopters of location services were already privacy-conscious by nature. Fire Eagle's positioning as a centralized location database managed by Yahoo, a company that was already seen as losing ground to Google and Facebook, didn't inspire confidence. Users worried about what would happen to their location data if Yahoo decided to shut down the service or sell it to another company. The competitive landscape shifted dramatically during Fire Eagle's brief existence, and Yahoo found itself fighting battles on multiple fronts. Facebook launched Facebook Places in 2010, bringing location sharing to hundreds of millions of users overnight. Apple introduced significant location services improvements with iOS 4, making it easier for individual apps to access GPS data directly without needing a broker service. Google expanded Google Latitude and began integrating location more deeply into Android and Google Maps. Most damaging of all, Foursquare and other location-based social networks proved that users wanted location services with social features and game mechanics, not invisible infrastructure. These services succeeded by making location sharing fun and social, with mayorships, badges, and friend discovery features that Fire Eagle completely lacked. By 2010, it became clear that the market wanted location-aware applications, not location brokerage services. Yahoo's broader corporate struggles certainly didn't help Fire Eagle's chances. The company was in the middle of a painful transition period, having rejected Microsoft's acquisition offer in 2008 and struggling to compete with Google in search and Facebook and social. Yahoo's Brickhouse incubator, which had spawned Fire Eagle, was shut down in 2009 as the company refocused on core products. Key Fire Eagle team members left Yahoo for other opportunities, and development of new features slowed significantly. The service never received the marketing support or executive attention that might have helped it gain traction. Yahoo's strategy shifted toward acquiring successful startups rather than building innovative new services internally, which left experimental projects like Fire Eagle without strong internal champions. The company's partnership strategy also faltered as potential integration partners chose to work directly with more popular platforms like Facebook or to build their own location services rather than depending on Yahoo's infrastructure. Technical limitations became more apparent as smartphones and location services evolved. Fire Eagle's API, while sophisticated for 2008, couldn't keep pace with the rapid improvements in mobile GPS accuracy and battery efficiency. The service was designed around manual location updates and periodic API calls, but users increasingly expected real-time, automatic location tracking. Fire Eagle never developed the kind of background location services that became standard on iOS and Android. The service also lacked support for location history, geofencing, or the kinds of contextual location features that became popular as smartphones got smarter. Fire Eagle's focus on broad compatibility meant that it often represented the lowest common denominator of location services rather than taking advantage of cutting-edge mobile capabilities. As apps began implementing sophisticated location features directly, the value proposition of a location broker diminished significantly. The end came quietly for Fire Eagle, which is perhaps fitting for a service that was always more about infrastructure than user experience. Yahoo announced in June 2013 that Fire Eagle would be shut down, giving users just a few months to export their data and find alternatives. The shutdown was part of a broader house-cleaning effort by new CEO Marissa Mayer, who was focused on eliminating underperforming products to streamline Yahoo's portfolio. By that time, Fire Eagle had fewer than 100,000 active users and virtually no developer momentum. The few remaining integrated applications had already begun transitioning to other location services or building their own location features. The shutdown barely registered in the tech press, a stark contrast to the optimistic coverage Fire Eagle had received at launch 5 years earlier. In many ways, Fire Eagle's quiet death was more damaging to its legacy than a spectacular failure would have been. It simply became irrelevant, forgotten by an industry that had moved far beyond the problems Fire Eagle was designed to solve. Looking back at Fire Eagle today, it's tempting to see it as a cautionary tale about being too early to market, but the reality is more complex. Fire Eagle's core insight about location as a platform was absolutely correct. Today, location services are fundamental to everything from ride-sharing to social media to advertising. Apple's core location framework and Google's location services API provide exactly the kind of location brokerage that Fire Eagle pioneered, just implemented at the operating system level rather than as a web service. The privacy controls that Fire Eagle offered were years ahead of their time and wouldn't become standard until Apple introduced granular location permissions in iOS 13. Even Fire Eagle's API design influenced later location services, with many of its concepts showing up in subsequent platforms. The service failed not because the vision was wrong, but because execution matters more than innovation, and timing matters more than being first. Fire Eagle was the right idea implemented in the wrong way at the wrong time by a company that was already losing its grip on the future of the internet. It remains a fascinating footnote in the history of location services, a reminder that even the most prescient technological visions require perfect execution and market timing to succeed. In the fast-moving world of consumer technology, being ahead of your time is often indistinguishable from being completely wrong, and Fire Eagle's brief flight ended in a crash that nobody noticed.